After the Civil War, Texas entered a prolonged period of instability and uncertainty. The war left the state politically, economically, and socially shattered. Emancipation destroyed the plantation labor system that had structured daily life and undercut the economic foundation of the antebellum elite. As slavery collapsed, former slaveholders lost not only their labor force, but the economic dominance that had long supported their political and social authority. By 1865, Texans faced stark choices: whether the old order rooted in racial hierarchy would be restored, or whether new political, economic, and social arrangements would take hold. Reconstruction represented the most direct challenge the pre-war power structure had ever faced. One of the most visible symbols of that challenge was the arrival of the United States Army. Federal troops entered Texas in May 1865 with a dual mission: to maintain order and to secure loyalty to the Union while protecting former slaves. Military leaders viewed Texas as unreconciled and potentially dangerous. General George A. Custer argued that the Army should continue governing the state until loyalty prevailed among the population. To many white Texans, this threatened permanent exclusion from power. They feared military protection of freedmen would upend the labor system and disrupt the state's fragile economy. Yet the Army lacked the capacity to reshape Texas society in lasting ways. Rapid demobilization reduced troop numbers from more than 50,000 to only a few thousand within a year, many of whom were stationed along the frontier. Constant turnover in command, 8 changes between 1865 and 1870, prevented consistent enforcement of policy. Some commanders, such as Charles Griffin, attempted to intervene vigorously in local politics, but their efforts fueled resentment rather than stability. Instead of enforcing Reconstruction, the Army's uneven and often heavy-handed presence hardened white resistance and encouraged Texans to defend pre-war political authority and racial control. Alongside the Army came the Freedmen's Bureau, established in September 1865 under General Edgar M. Gregory. Its stated purpose was to guide formerly enslaved people through the transition from slavery to freedom by creating a free labor system. Many white Texans feared the Bureau was radical, particularly because it supported black education and legal rights. In practice, however, the Bureau was conservative. Rather than redistributing land, officials pushed freed people back onto plantations as wage laborers or sharecroppers. Labor contracts and debt became the basis of the new system. With no access to land or credit, most freed people had little choice but to comply. Planters publicly complained about the inefficiency of free labor, but privately many accepted sharecropping as a workable replacement for slavery. Debt peonage allowed landowners to maintain significant control over workers' lives. White resistance focused especially on bureau courts and schools, which challenged local authority and racial norms. Yet the Bureau was chronically underfunded. Its schools reached only a fraction of the black population, and its courts lacked the power to protect freed people effectively. While the Bureau produced limited material change, it became a powerful symbol of federal intervention that intensified white opposition to Reconstruction. Freed people themselves posed the most significant challenge to the antebellum order. Newly freed black Texans moved quickly to reclaim control over their lives. They sought authority over their labor, reunited families separated by slavery, and created independent churches and schools. Education was especially important, symbolizing both independence and hope for the future. These efforts alarmed white Texans, who viewed black autonomy as a threat to both the labor system and racial hierarchy. Many responded with fraud, intimidation, and violence designed to enforce dependence. These conditions convinced freed people that freedom without political power was fragile. Increasingly, black Texans turned toward organized political action. On March 10, 1866, freed people gathered in Austin to demand suffrage and access to public school lands. The meeting led to the formation of the Austin Freedmen Society, laying the groundwork for black participation in the Texas Republican Party and signaling the emergence of freed people as political actors. Presidential Reconstruction under Andrew Johnson offered a more conciliatory approach but ultimately enabled the restoration of the old order. Johnson appointed Andrew J. Hamilton, a Unionist, as provisional governor and required Texas to abolish slavery, repudiate Confederate debt, and nullify secession. Participation required an oath of amnesty intended to exclude former Confederates. Unionists hoped this would displace the antebellum elite and open space for political reform. Instead, former Confederates quickly reasserted themselves. Despite military defeat, they retained economic power and social influence. The election of January 1866 returned many of them to office, and the Constitutional Convention that followed was dominated by pre-war political leaders. For example, one delegate present was Oral Roberts, who was the chair of the state's secession convention. During the war, he rose to the rank of colonel. The resulting Constitution of 1866 ended slavery and secession, but denied black suffrage, validated most Confederate-era laws, and restored conservative rule. James W. Throckmorton was elected governor. He opposed secession at the 1861 convention, but he would become a Confederate Army colonel during the war. He was also the Constitutional Convention's president. This confirmed that Presidential Reconstruction failed to remake Texas politics. The legislature soon intensified tensions by rejecting the 14th Amendment and passing black codes designed to regulate black labor. Like other former Confederate states, Texas sent its pre-war leaders to Congress. For example, one of the state's new senators was Oral Roberts, but he would ultimately be rejected by Congress. Texas would not have a U.S. senator until 1870. Southern behavior angered Northern voters. In 1866, they overwhelmingly voted for Republicans in that year's midterm elections. This would give the Republicans two-thirds majorities in the House and Senate, which allowed them to override any presidential veto. Southern actions convinced Congress that Texas and the other former Confederate states had no intention of accepting the spirit of Reconstruction. In response, Congress enacted the first Reconstruction Act in March 1867, placing Texas under military rule as part of the 5th Military District. This began what historians call Congressional Reconstruction. The Third Reconstruction Act empowered the Army to get involved in the state's politics. As a result, General Charles Griffin, who oversaw Texas, appealed to his superior, Philip Sheridan, to remove Throckmorton as an impediment to Reconstruction. Sheridan approved and appointed Elisha Pease, the man who Throckmorton had defeated, as the new governor. Griffin would die of yellow fever in September 1867. His successor, General Joseph Reynolds, continued his predecessor's efforts. In April 1869, he removed officials that could not swear that they did not support the Confederacy. Congressional Reconstruction dramatically altered Texas politics. A second constitutional convention was elected under universal male suffrage, including black men. Unionists and freedpeople formed a biracial Republican coalition that conservatives denounced as radical. When conservatives boycotted the election, Republicans won control. The Republican Party had only a minimal presence in the South before the Civil War. White Southerners were expected to align with the Democratic Party, and because Republicans opposed the expansion of slavery, Democrats frequently derided them as black Republicans. For a white Southerner to join the Republican Party was therefore seen as an act of betrayal, both to the South and to the white race. Those who did so were often scornfully labeled scalawags. After the war, another voting base emerged, known as carpetbaggers. These were Northerners who remained in the South, primarily to help. The term implied that they came with cheap luggage or bags of carpet, which they would stuff their ill-gotten gains and return to the North. A third Republican voting base were the freedmen themselves. They would support Republican candidates when they had the right to vote. The Convention of 1868 met in June and would not adjourn until February 1869. It ratified the 13th and 14th Amendments and granted the freedmen citizenship rights. They could vote, hold office, serve on juries, and attend schools. Black civil rights caused a split within Texas Republicans. One side were the moderates, which included Alexander Jackson Hamilton and Elisha Pease. They were willing to compromise with former Confederates. The other camp were the radicals, led by Edmund J. Davis. Under him, they advocated a strong government and stressed legal equality of all before the law, black enfranchisement, and public education. Under them, the Texas state government was the most powerful it had ever been. One significant way to stay in power was to institute an ironclad oath. It required anyone wishing to have their right to vote restored to swear they did not willingly support the Confederacy. This, by design, kept many on the political sidelines. Few would tolerate such a status for long, so former Confederates began to fight back. They intimidated people who were even thinking about voting Republican. The most well-known group that did so was the Ku Klux Klan. Voting back then was a much more public thing. It was not the private affair that modern Americans are used to. Oftentimes, voters would proclaim their choice before election officials. Another method was to put a ticket, usually color-coded to represent parties or candidates, and place them in clear jars. Thus, Republicans were not hard to find when they came to vote. Conservative Southerners would thus know who their intended targets were, and groups like the KKK appeared, terrorizing Republican voters, both white and black. In December 1869, Texans went to the polls to elect a new governor. The choice was between two Republicans, the moderate Hamilton and the radical Davis. Each side competed for President Ulysses S. Grant's endorsement. Ultimately, Grant supported Davis, who won by 800 votes. On February 12, 1870, the new Texas legislature approved the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments and elected the state's new U.S. senators. On March 30th, Grant signed the law that officially brought Texas back into the Union. The Davis administration pursued an ambitious reform agenda. It created a state police force and militia to combat racial violence and suppress the Ku Klux Klan. It established the state's first centralized public school system. The state was in control of selecting and testing teachers and predetermined their curriculum. Compulsory attendance also did not help its popularity amongst conservative Texans. This state government, like all the Republican governments, were more expensive than their pre-war counterparts. One major investment was in railroads, but in order to get the funds, these governments had to tax at higher levels. Another blow to Davis's popularity occurred when Adjutant General James Davidson, who headed the state police, fled the state with $35,000 of state money. By the early 1870s, opposition towards the government coalesced into a coalition of Democrats and moderate Republicans. KKK intimidation did not work because the federal government passed the KKK Act, which effectively cracked down on the Klan's activities. Instead, former Confederates began taking the ironclad oath, even if they were lying, in order to participate in the new government. In 1871, Republicans began losing state elections. The Democrats won all of the state's U.S. Congress seats. The next year, redistricting gave the state 2 more seats, and the Democrats won those as well. In addition to federal elections, Democrats also began winning statewide contests, eventually gaining a majority in the state legislature. Once in power, it abolished the state police, limited the governor's ability to declare martial law, and dismantled the state school system, putting them under the control of local school boards. In 1873, Davis ran for re-election. The Democrats nominated Richard Koch, who decisively won, receiving twice as many votes. The Republicans attempted to use the state Supreme Court to overturn the election, and Davis refused to concede defeat. His only hope to remain in power was in appealing to President Grant, but he refused. After exhausting all options, Davis conceded. This effectively ended Reconstruction in Texas. The new government worked on writing a new constitution, which is still in effect. It could not reverse everything its predecessor did, such as unratify the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. It did, however, limit the power of the governor. He could call the legislature into special session, use the militia to suppress rebellion or defend against Indian attack, and veto legislation. It also limited gubernatorial terms to just 2 years, although that would be increased to 4 in 1972. The legislature would only meet every other year, and state judges and justices became elected offices rather than appointed. Finally, it restored powers the state assumed back to the counties. Although Reconstruction failed politically, it left lasting structural changes. Railroads expanded rapidly, tying Texas to national markets. Cotton production rebounded and surpassed pre-war levels, while cattle and wool industries grew. The population increased, cities expanded, and the state modernized economically. Most importantly, slavery did not return. Black Texans, though excluded politically after Reconstruction, retained families, churches, and schools built during these years, the foundations of an independent black community. Texas emerged from Reconstruction modernizing yet unequal. Old hierarchies largely returned, but the social and economic landscape had been irreversibly altered. For many white Texans, Reconstruction reinforced a belief in destiny and progress, even as racial injustice persisted. Reconstruction failed to permanently redistribute power, but it permanently changed what Texas could become.